Thank you.
You bet.
Well, good evening, everybody. And this is Catherine Wissner with the University of Wyoming, Laramie County Extension Office, and the Laramie County Master Gardeners on the Gardening for Success program. And tonight's program is part 3 of Growing Hydroponically, as taught by Mike Heath. And right now, Mike is sharing his screen with us. And Mike, I show that we've got 6:32. So we're pretty much ready to go. We'll have people still join us here. But Mike, if you want to get going on the program.
Can definitely do that. And welcome, everyone. Glad you could make it tonight. And we're going to kind of conclude the 3-part series tonight. But hang on, because part 4 is coming down the road. It's going to be a while, though. I've got to build some more systems so that I can get some pictures, and then we'll go into actually how to build a less expensive hydroponic system than what you'd have to buy if you actually went out and just purchased one. I do want to digress first and go back to last week, and Catherine's probably going to get mad at me, but I'm going to kind of comment on something that she said about humidity and dehumidifiers. Catherine, you made the comment last week that you can always run the hose into your sump tank and recover that water. I had never thought about that, and I went out that night and I ran the hose into the sump tank and said, wow, I can recover this water. Came back the next day and my sump tank was overflowing. So if you're going to do that, I would definitely put it into a secondary container and then transfer it either by transfer pump or manually later. There's no sense in losing all the nutrients if you have more humidity than what your sump tank can hold. And I'm actually running a dual dehumidifying system right now, and it's barely keeping up as humid as the outdoors has been lately with all the monsoonal moisture coming in. So with that, we'll jump right in to this week's segment, and we're going to back up a little bit and go back to starting plants. We'll take it from starting plants right on through harvest tonight. So some of this is going to be a rehash of last week. We'll actually go back at one point to the first night, and I'll comment on something I talked about then, and then we'll move forward. First off, make sure you select your media, and some media works better for some plants and some works better for others. Primarily rock wool, cocoa coir, hydroton, and such are the medias that you want to use. Never use soil. That just causes all kinds of disease problems we've already talked about. And it'll also just cause mud in your system, gum up the impellers on your pump, burn it up. There's nothing good that's going to come out of soil as far as a hydroponic system goes. Cocoa coir seems to work best for rooting your cuttings to go in the system. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute. I tried rooting in rock wool. It works, kind of. I got about a 50% success rate on that. And right now with cocoa coir, I've got a 100% success rate with rose geranium and basil, and it's just working great. You always want to start in plain water. One of the first mistakes I made was I started in a mild nutrient solution, and it burned the seedlings up, and there wasn't much nutrient in it at all. And then I learned to just use plain water until they have at least 4 leaves, and then you can go to a very mild nutrient solution. Some of the solutions will actually give you a formula for seedlings, and some won't. Some would just leave it up to you. And if it doesn't give you something, I'd say no more than a quarter strength to start out with. No sense in burning those seedlings up. And they've got plenty of nutrients to start with anyway to get going. Make sure you use a tray with a plastic dome so you keep it humid inside until you get good germination. And watch your water level because it is dry in Wyoming except the last 2 weeks. and make sure your media stays moist all the time. Now, some seeds don't do well with high humidity. Peas being a prime example, and I'll show you a photo of that here in a second. Pea seeds will rot if the humidity is too high on them. So make sure you check your seeds daily because they're going to germinate faster than in soil. For example, radishes are supposed to take about a week to germinate. Mine germinated in 12 to 18 hours. And 4 days after putting the seeds in, I was transferring them over a lot faster than what I anticipated I would. So this is pea seeds here, and these are at 8 days, started in water. And you can see some of these that haven't germinated. And the question first comes up is, why didn't they germinate when everybody else has? Because they're rotten seeds. They're completely soft. They're just turned to mush. Nothing good's ever going to come out of that. But this is the tray after about 8 days. Over here, you see what a root looks like out of that tray. And that's the root at 8 days just in water. It's set up against peppers here just so I can get a contrast against the root so that you can see how long it is. That plant is actually ready to transfer over. We talked back to on the first week about a little experiment I was doing with strawberry plants to see if I can get strawberry plants out of my soil garden into the hydroponic system. There is a way to do it, and I'll take you through that right now, because as you have a soil-based garden, you'll have some runners that always just throw themselves up over the top of the strawberry plants, and they never touch the ground, which means they're not contaminated. Nice thing about that is you can take those runners, put them into some rock wool, and you want to tie them in, and that hole at the top of your rock wool should go right here so that this sits down inside that indentation. And just tie it down loosely, but just so that it stays touching and doesn't come loose. It's always going to be in contact with moisture. Take that, put it into a baggie, and make sure you keep your runner here attached. Don't break it loose. It's got to stay on that mother plant. Put it into a baggie with just a little bit of water in it, and I'm talking ½ ounce is plenty. Close the baggie as far as you can with that runner still attached, and the runner on this one is coming out right here because that bag's closed. Can't see it for that leaf. And then set that back.
Mike,
yes.
We can't see your slides.
You can't?
No.
Interesting. Catherine, can you see the slides? Because they are shared. I wonder if Catherine dropped off.
Maybe she's taking a coffee break.
She was having some issues early on. Ouch. That's going to make things difficult. Some of these slides are really interesting. This one is. I am going to stop sharing and see if I can come back to it. Guys, bear with me for a minute. But she was having some instability in her system early on. Now, can everybody see this one? Is this working now? Becky, are you there?
Yes, perfect.
It did work?
Yes, thank you.
I see you now too, Mike.
Okay, let me back up and start over. I'd be happy to do that.
Yes.
Okay, give me just a second. This I would go ahead and skip because you saw it last week. I think talking is fine for that one. But let's go here to the peas. This is 8 days of peas. And you can see some of these didn't germinate, like this one. And there's one here. Those are the ones that went soft and just rotted. They're no good at all. They're just mush. Too much moisture is what I believe happened with these. But out of that tray, this is the root that I was getting at 8 days. And that's just starting in plain water. Nothing special about it at all. That plant is actually ready to transfer. Now this is the strawberry plants I was talking about. And I'll just kind of wing through this rather than say everything again. But right here is what you want to have in that indentation in the rock wool cube. Tie it loosely with just a piece of twine. And this is just jute twine, nothing special about it. Make sure, however, that your runner is not broken. It's got to stay attached to that mother plant. That's where your nutrients are going to come from while this thing's rooting. What you've done is you just substituted the rock wool for the soil. But this runner here has never touched soil, so it's not contaminated. This one just flew out over the top of the plants. We just kind of hang it up there in the air. Put it into a baggie here with just that little bit of water, just a ½ ounce is plenty. And you can see just the water level right here is all that's in there. And that'll keep it humid because you've got it sealed here as far over as you can without breaking that runner. And I have had as many as 5 runners in one baggie, and they work just fine. Set that baggie back into the foliage of your strawberry plant here so the sun doesn't cook it, and give it 2 to 3 weeks. This is the root after 2 weeks right here. And that one's already been transferred. I am giving the other ones another week or so before I move them over. And so this actually does work. The ones that I've transferred, about 5 of them are looking great. One of them's already put on about 2 inches of growth just in the last week. Now, I said I talked about cocoa coir and basil and rooting in cocoa coir. Well, this is it. And these basil plants actually had died out. I was about ready to just throw them out and start new. And I just got kind of a wild hair and says, I think I'll just see if I can root new plants off of these. There's still some living parts of them. And darn if they didn't root, they're growing in the system now. The issue I had, though, and I would caution you about, although this works very well to root these plants, I just stuck the cuttings down into a tray with cocoa coir in it. And I think most of you are probably smarter than I am and see the problem already. As I was ready to move them, all the roots had grown together. And this is only about 2 weeks out. So I had to take these out very carefully, untangle the roots, and then put them back into a net pot with cocoa coir in that so I could transfer them over. Some of them didn't make it, most of them did. And those that didn't make it, actually, I'm pretty sure I broke the roots on them. But make sure you check your nutrient levels. And I really suggest at least looking at your system every day. You don't have to go in and check everything with a monitor, but you want to just look and make sure you don't have a tube that's popped out or a pipe that's broken or sump tank that cracked. Those things do happen. Pumps do go out. The power supply or power goes out on the I'm trying to say the outlets themselves. They have a small breaker in there that can shut off. There's a whole multitude of things that can go wrong, and really just casting an eye over it for 10 seconds, you can see a lot of those things. And if you take care of them right away, they're not an issue. But if you don't pay attention to it at all and it goes on for an extended period of time, then yes, it does become an issue. Your pH for each plant does vary. Most of them, in vegetables anyway, are generally within 5.8 to 6.2. There's a few that go a little bit lower, a few that like it a little bit higher, but primarily you're looking at 5.8 to 6.2. If you do get it a little too acidic or it goes too basic, it's not necessarily going to kill the plants, but they won't produce as heavy and they won't grow as fast. So they like this very narrow range And anything outside that, they still grow, but everything slows down. You want to monitor each nutrient separately if you're wealthy. I am not, because each one of those monitors is about $300 to $400, and they're for a specific nutrient. They're not multifunction, and I just can't afford the cost for every nutrient that's in there. So I just use a multifunction monitor, like you see right here from Apera. I say they're about 150, and there's a wide range of monitors. This one was $89 on Amazon, and it works great. It monitors for the 4 basic functions that you want to have. That's pH, total dissolved solids, which is how much nutrient you actually have in, but it's total nutrients. It's not individual nutrients. Salinity and EC, which are your primary concerns. EC and salinity are the big ones that can kill your plants pretty quick. Don't ever let it go over 2.0. That's just way too salty. And as far as total dissolved solids, there are tables on the internet that will list each type of plant and what it requires. And there's tables for herbs, there's tables for flowers, vegetables, and shrubs. So, and you just search for them, and they're out there and easy to find. Nutrient types, we talked about a little bit last week, just basic. And Becky, thank you for the photos that you sent. They are very good and just fit right in perfect. We talked about powder and liquid. Powder is less messy and it lasts a lot longer than the liquid does. They all do require some mixing. You can see this is a liquid over here. And, you know, gloves, because it is really messy. And I really hope this lady has old clothes on. If you get this stuff on your clothes, it stains. They come in 2- and 3-part mixes. And it depends on what brand you're using, how they do it. Different blends for different stages of growth, different types of nutrients for different stages of growth. But what I found in the liquids, they're not as specific to the type of plant as what the dry powders are. Powders are all 3-part, and they use different blends at different stages of growth, and they come in blends for each specific variety of vegetable or type of vegetable. Like your herbs and peppers will have a blend. Tomatoes have a blend that's all for them. Strawberries have a blend that's just for strawberries. There's one that's just for cucumbers. Just a whole variety, and the mix is specific to that particular vegetable. So transferring seedlings, and this is a wonderful example of a typical tomato system, the correct tomato system. Becky, correct me if I'm wrong, this looks like a 1-inch rock wool cube set down inside a 4-inch rock wool cube around here, setting on a rock wool log in here, and with your feeder tubes coming into the rock wool, not the stem, but into the rock wool itself, and there'll be one for each tomato plant. This is one type of system, works very well, and it's the typical tomato system that you'll find with commercial growers. I am trying now using a kind of a variation of an ebb and flow and this system, primarily because I'm a cheapskate, and so far it's working very well. Where I have the rock wool in a net pot, and the roots are just hanging, but then the nutrient is still flowing into the rock wool and running down through the roots. And we'll give that a go. We'll see how it works out. Again, don't use any nutrient until you got permanent leaves or 4 or more leaves. And once you've got good roots, you can go ahead and transfer that. Now, in tomatoes like this, and I've never used this system, so Becky, like I say, if I'm speaking out of turn, tell me. Right as your roots are starting to come out of this first rock wool, you want to get that transferred. so they can grow into the next rock wool cube. Because if you bind those plants up, you stand a chance on breaking them when you transfer those things. So each transfer method is going to depend on the plant. Like I say, this is a typical tomato system, works wonders. I have some systems that I'm actually rooting plants in the system itself. All of my rose geranium is being rooted directly in the system. There is no transfer of those plants. The peppers, as soon as they get a root about inch or 2 inches long, they get transferred right away. And it actually is working out pretty slick. You just need to make sure the nutrient mix will reach the media so they can keep those roots moist. You want to make sure you keep your system covered as much as possible. And this is a strawberry system at CSU. And you can see the cover on the system here. Now what this is, if you look here, this might look familiar to you. What they have done, and one of the things I want to do for segment 4, is they've taken a PVC fence post cover and just cut it out across the top. And that's what they're planting their strawberry plants in. This is the cap that's just glued on. And then it's set on top of trays here. Now, they are running their nutrient into here. And I don't know if they're recovering out of this sump here or how they're doing it. I should have looked closer and I didn't. I was trying to listen to what was actually being said. And so I'm not sure exactly what they're doing with the system. I do want to go back at some point in time and take a look at it. And you can see up here, these are ebb and flow systems here, and this is a vertical system they also had set up for strawberries. They found it worked, didn't have quite the production that the other, and it holds fewer plants. But anyway, your covers will keep algae from growing primarily, and algae can, kind of mess things up until it starts breaking loose and getting down inside your system. It also reduces evaporation of the nutrient mix. It'll keep leaves and the fruit out of the nutrient mix so it stays cleaner. And it makes your harvest easier because there again, you don't have fruit hanging down into the nutrient. You want to make sure that you monitor that nutrient daily. By nutrient, I don't mean go through with your probe and monitor every day, but at least look at it and make sure you've still got water, there's no breaks, no leaks, and so forth. You do want to check for nutrient levels at least every other day. Frankly, once you've got experience with your system and you know where it goes, you want to keep records, by the way, and you know how long it takes for that nutrient to be used up. You can hold off more than just 2 days to check your nutrients. Once you know how much water you're using, either every day or by the week or whatever, you can wait a little bit longer to check it. But you've got to have that history first so that you know about when your system, whatever kind you're using, needs to be monitored and checked and possibly replenished. I'm running 2 different kind of systems right now, and they're both on different schedules. Fortunately, I do keep records. They're sitting right there with the system all the time, and I can just glance at those and I'll see about how long I have between each replenishment of nutrients or the water level as well. If you do run out of that nutrient solution, your pump's gone. They'll last about 12 hours, depending on the pump, without having water running through it. So much longer than that, and you have no pump, and if you don't catch it, you also have no crop. This is algae growth in one of my tanks. This is one of the tomatoes that I just transferred over about 3 weeks ago. This is here actually only as a holding tank because the tomatoes got ready before the system they were supposed to go in was ready. So I had to have some place to put them. So I just kind of moved some parsley out of the way and put the tomatoes in here. And you can see the algae starting to form up here. Cover didn't quite cover the water. So I've got about a foot over here that's open. And this is algae level. You can see where the water level is at here, where the tank's full. And this is actually filled, so this is water here, or the nutrient mix. And I think it's still going down, because that's pretty high up here, and not quite as low as I'd expect it here. So I think it's still going down, still draining when I took this photo. And you can see this brown in here in the bottom. That is actually the sediment that's washing out of the roots of the parsley plants that I put in there. I transferred them out of a liquid nutrient system into the dry nutrient system. And if you remember the photo from last week of the gelatinous roots versus the white roots, that's what came out of this system. And this is the sediment coming off of those gelatinous roots and settling into the bottom of this tank. Now, it never went anywhere else. It didn't get into the sump tank. It stopped right here because it's heavy, and it wouldn't make it out the drain. As soon as I got these tomatoes transferred, I did drain this entire tank and clean it and take all that sediment out. It took about a day and a half to get it cleaned and dried, drained, cleaned, and dried. And then care for your plants. Once they start growing, if you have any vining plants, you've got to use a trellis or string or something so they have something to climb on. I'm using right now just baling twine. It's strong, it's inexpensive, and it's readily available. And it's also it's a plastic, so you can reuse it. Jute will end up rotting, possibly break, it frays easy, and the baling twine doesn't. Trellis clips are cheap. They're easy to use. They're reusable. In fact, I just reclipped all my tomatoes yesterday, and I just popped the clip off, tighten the string up, put the clip back on, and they're good to go. And like I say, it's just real easy. It just takes a second to take those things off. But you can also use surveyor's tape, wire, use string. There for a while, I was using the marking tape that I used to use hunting back when I did that, and just tied it up loosely. It all works. There's all kinds of ways to do it, whatever you prefer. Make sure that you're pruning your plants as necessary. With tomatoes, you're going to prune quite often to keep the suckers off. Other plants require pruning on different schedules, and some plants will never require pruning. I do go through some of mine. If I have a dead leaves or something, I'll pull those out and get rid of them. They just harbor disease. So if you can get to them, it's easy to just pull them off and get rid and just throw them away. You want to make sure that you ensure pollination too. There's a couple of methods to do that. There's a manual method. Electric toothbrush works very well. Just make sure that as you touch the plant, you're touching the stem and not the flower itself. You can bruise that flower with that toothbrush, hit the stem, and it accomplishes the same purpose, but it releases the pollen without damaging the flower itself. They also make a special piece of equipment that does exactly the same thing as the electric toothbrush. Costs about $30, but it just has a longer rod on it. It's about 18 inches long, so you can reach the plants a little bit easier. But there again, it's about $30 versus a $5 toothbrush, and they both do exactly the same thing. Or you can use bees. Now, Catherine could probably speak to this better than I can, but they do make beehives. They're specifically for greenhouses and warehouses. And the only downside that I see to them is that they don't carry over from year to year. At least the companies that sell them say they don't. And there's where Catherine could probably know better than I would on that, because I haven't used them. They say that every year you have to replace the entire hive and start over. And I don't know. At some point in time, I do plan on getting a hive of bees for the greenhouse, but that's probably a year or so out. In a greenhouse, a hydroponic system, or a warehouse hydroponic system, The pests that you get in a soil-based system cross over. It's the same pest. The correct nutrient mix will help reduce the pests, not necessarily get rid of them altogether. But like I say, it's the same ones that come over. And just because it's the dead of winter and there's 3 feet of snow on the ground banked up against the door and you're digging yourself out, does not mean that you're not going to have aphids. Trust me. You can see this photo right here. That's March. And we had all kinds of snow on the ground and a lot of cold weather. And I planted radishes in a test system right here. The first set of radishes were fine, no issues whatsoever. The second crop, my gosh, they had aphids come up on them and they just started moving right on down the line. This is a borage plant that's sitting next to them. And this is like within 2 days, they went from 0 to this. So I don't know if the aphid eggs came in with the seeds or if they were in something else. I just don't have a clue, but I was just loaded with them in about 2 days. And fortunately, ladybugs do a wonderful job on them, but not before they actually have infected a lot of plants. Come in various colors, sucking pests. Often you find them on the stems. I had so many there, wasn't room on the stems for them. They were everywhere. The leaves will turn yellow, the plant's going to die. All of the radishes did die, and they were gone within a week. Thrips, we also have those. Sucking pests, these small metallic black specks on the leaves will turn brown again and dry up, and the plant's going to die as well. This guy, I swear they're born 4 inches long. I have never seen one until it was fully mature. I don't know if they just grow fast or I'm blind or what, but on my tomato plants, they're easy to see, but they're always fully mature when I find them. The nice thing is you can just pick them off and throw out and let the robins have a blast with them because they love them. Spider mites, very small and hard to see. So you pretty much got to look for the webbing, as you can see here. And it's a piercing pest, and it'll also just totally destroy your plants. Pest management. Integrated pest management does work in hydroponics and greenhouses, but you've got to be a heck of a lot more careful than in soil-based garden. To begin with, any chemicals that you put in an enclosed environment like that is dangerous. They may drift onto the wrong plants that shouldn't have them. They're concentrated because there's no wind, no air to ventilate that residue. And it's more likely to harm your beneficial insects. So chemicals, just very difficult. You lose your organic status. It's not good in the greenhouse. Beneficial insects are much safer. They do a great job. I use ladybugs a lot this year, some lacewings, and they pretty much took care of the aphid problem. They left a lot of residue though, once they sucked the aphids dry. So it still looked like there was aphids on the plants, and they were actually all just dead carcasses. Water and horticultural oils do work, and they're not dangerous. There's no drift to them, and you can direct them to a specific plant. Larger insects, just pick them off, Japanese beetles, hornworms, things of that nature. Pick them off, throw them out, let the birds have fun. Same diseases in hydroponics that you can get in anything else. One of the nice things about blossom end rot, as in this photo here, it is not caused because of lack of water in a hydroponic system. It definitely is caused because you have a lack of calcium. So it's less likely to actually happen in a hydroponic system, but it still can occur. Gray mold, this thing's bad news. Usually it means you have something contaminated from soil, and when it takes over, it really takes over, and you won't see it, and then all of a sudden the next day everything's starting to blossom and gray mold. The plants turn fuzzy, you get fuzz around the edges of your media, and essentially you're going to throw the entire system out, disinfect it, and start over. I'll show you a system here in a minute that I had to do that with, the first one I ever put in. And I had really thought that I could just take strawberry plants, wash the roots off, and put them in the system and they will grow. Absolutely not. You've got to do something different, which I showed you earlier, and that will work, but just taking them out of the ground and washing them doesn't, because they're still contaminated. All the tomato diseases are the same. Viruses, bacteria, lots of min rot, no different. Anything that you get in soil, you can get in hydroponics. It's to a lesser degree. You have less of a chance of getting those diseases because you're in a more controlled environment, but it can happen. This is the system right here that I got gray mold in. This is the nutrient film system, vertical system. Parsley, basil, and oregano was in this system. And on this far end, in the very end of the nutrient system, I put in about a dozen strawberry plants. And it took, they were growing great, and then it took maybe a month, and I came out one day and I had gray mold on the strawberry plants. And within probably 3 or 4 days, it had progressed throughout the entire system. And I ended up having to just take everything out and throw it away and start over again. It wasn't a terrible loss because it was an experimental system. There was nothing growing in there that couldn't be lost, but it was also about almost a week to clean and disinfect this system. The brown that you see here is not the gray mold. That's actually liquid nutrient. It forms a salty crust where it dries, and it's really kind of nasty. When I took this system down, I thought I was going to have a hard time cleaning it off, so I just set it outside by the shop, and we actually got some rain and dissolved everything off of it. I didn't have to clean anything. It just, the rain washed it and did a beautiful job. Now it's all gleaming white like it was brand new PVC again. So some of the disinfecting methods that you can use, UV radiation, which is essentially just a black light. However, you got to be careful because it does break down some of the pesticides and the phytotoxic chemicals, and just kills the photosynthesis making characteristics of the plant. There's another issue with UV radiation that's not talked about in the literature, and I kind of learned it by accident, mistake, whatever you want to call it. I put a UV light inside one of my sump tanks to disinfect the discharge water as it was coming in. UV light grows algae like white light doesn't know how. It took about a week, and I was loaded in algae and had to totally take the system down, clean out the sump tank, and start over again with that particular system, at least with the sump tank. Fortunately, the way I'm set up, I was able to save everything in the trays while I cleaned the sump tank out. So everything wasn't a total loss, and it just took a couple of days to do that. But I wouldn't put a UV light in the water like that again. To just leave it dark, covered, nothing there. Heat sterilization works well if you have access to a steam cleaner. You got to make sure your system is totally inactive. There's nothing in there. Steam, of course, will kill the plants. Ozone works well. Unfortunately, for most of us, it's just cost prohibitive. Mainly used in very large commercial systems. And there's a lot of chemicals as well. Chlorine, bleach, that's phytotoxic. Hydrogen peroxide is phytotoxic. Iodine is still being researched as far as being able to use it in active systems. The research is looking promising, but it's not there yet. So the bottom line really is, don't disinfect an active system. Take everything down, have no plants in it, and then go through and just thoroughly disinfect it, clean it, and then rinse it, put your plants back in and start up again. Disease management, cleanliness is key. Just like in a soil-based garden, your detritus from the plants can harbor disease, insects, and so forth. And it does the same thing in hydroponics. I spoke, I think it was the first week, how stinging nettle was such a dirty plant. And I cleaned out a 40-gallon trash can full of stinging nettle leaves that had fallen off the plants just in one tray here just a couple of weeks ago. And it filled that trash can. I still got 2 trays to go. So they drop a lot of leaves, and you got to keep those cleaned out. Make sure you're using only clean water. I know that sounds really childish. Well, what would I use? Dirty water? Well, yeah, you may take rainwater, for example, if you're capturing that. Well, rainwater is going to have dust and dirt coming off the roof into it, so it's not clean water. It's fine for your soil-based garden, but not for your hydroponic system. Wear clean clothes to work on your system. And this too is, it seems like it's something that everybody should know, but a lot of us don't think about. And I know I have a hard time because I'll work in the soil side, move right inside when it gets too hot and go to work there. But it's something to watch, and just be clean in everything you're doing. You don't want to transfer any pathogens from outside to inside. Prune your plants as necessary and then clean everything up. I know I'm bad about not cleaning as fast as I should, especially in harvest. I'll go ahead and finish the harvest before I clean everything up, and things may lay there for a day or two while I'm doing that. But as you prune, as best you can, go ahead and clean that up. And for the same reasons, all of that dead plant material does harbor disease and insects. Now here, this is a little bit tricky. Periodically change out your nutrient solution. And this is going to vary with everybody's system. As long as you're not getting a lot of sediment in the bottom of your sump tank, and your levels are staying fairly constant, you have a clear nutrient solution, you're probably good to go. You don't need to change it out. If you start seeing sediment, algae, it's probably time to go ahead and clean everything out, shut it down, take the plants out, clean it, disinfect it, dry it, rinse it good before you put anything back in it again. But it's not something you have to do very often. Once a year, would you change plants out perhaps? Or maybe once every 2 years. There again, it depends on your system and what you're seeing with it. When your system's down, it's a good time to go ahead and disinfect it. I have ones going down here in the next few days, and I'll disinfect it just because it's there. It's just a good time when there's no plants in it, or I'll put more in there. The easiest method is to circulate a chlorine solution through the entire system so that you contact everything, but make sure that you rinse it thoroughly when it's complete. There again, chlorine is phototoxic or phytotoxic, and it can damage your plants if it's still in the system. The nice thing about chlorine, though, if you use a bleach solution, if you let it sit for a week or so afterwards, all that bleach is going to dissipate. Chlorine is going to go into the air, and it won't be an issue after that. If you've done any cleaning of your pots and disinfecting, say at the end of the year, and you let that bleach solution sit, you'll notice that the odor of the chlorine dissipates over time. Well, that's exactly what's going on with it, is it does dissipate, it breaks down and goes up into the atmosphere, and eventually that water has no chlorine in it. And the same thing with your system. If you don't get it thoroughly cleaned and dried, if you just let it sit for a few days, that chlorine is going to dissipate. As you're mixing your chlorine solution, though, most of us don't have chlorine test strips to know exactly what the parts per million are of chlorine to water. And that's okay, because essentially if you can smell the chlorine in the water, it's strong enough. It doesn't have to be a strong chlorine smell, but if you can smell it at all, then you're strong enough to disinfect with. And now harvest time. We've made it through with no disease, we've made it through with no pests, and now it's time to start harvesting. And harvest is going to be sooner than with a soil-based system. I mentioned the radishes, 8 to 12 hours, or 12 to 18 hours, and I had radishes germinating. 4 days later, I transferred them. And it's pretty much the same with everything else. Peas germinated in about 3 or 4 days. 8 days, you saw where they were at. Tomatoes and peppers so far have been about what the package says. About 2 weeks is what it's taken to germinate tomatoes and peppers. But once they germinate, they start growing pretty fast. And a lot of varieties are going to last a lot longer, and you get multiple harvests off of them. I have put some strawberries in. I'm interested to see if they'll just continue to produce instead of producing, stopping, and so forth, and what that cycle is actually going to be, since they're not going to be outside and subject to the weather. Tomato plants very easily can last a year before they're replaced, especially the indeterminate plants. The problem that you may end up with there, depending on what facilities you have, the indeterminates will continue to grow. And throughout that entire year, they're going to grow. And it's very easy for a tomato plant to be 12 feet tall. So keep that in mind as you select your seeds. Leaf vegetables may last even longer, as long as you're trimming no more than a third of them at a time and then letting that regrow before you trim again. And as you see, these are actually reversed. I just noticed. This is the parsley here. Now, I've had 5 harvests off of this parsley. I should never have gone past 4. And that's 5 harvests in 11 months. And what's left here is actually just an experiment that I'm doing to see if I can get these to grow a better root system and continue producing. So far, I'm getting about half and half. If they had a good root system started before that 5th harvest, then they're starting to put out new leaves. If they didn't have a good root system, they're just dying out, which is really what they should be doing at this point in time, is dying out. Stinging nettle down here at the bottom right. If I can get this thing to work, right here. That is right after the first harvest, it's 3 weeks later. And when I harvest stinging nettle, it goes all the way down to the bottom. So it's just maybe an inch off the top of the tray here. So this is the growth back in about 3 weeks. At 6 weeks, which is where I'm at now, this is growing into the lights, and it's time to harvest again. So you get a lot more harvest, and they'll be a lot faster than in soil. So pretty much that is tonight, and I am going to, I think, put a note in the chat room, because a couple of people in the first class wanted to come out and see the system. So I'm going to put my phone number in there. And if you do want to come out and visit, feel free. Just give me a call, make sure I'm home.
Hey, Mike,
Yes,
this is
ma'am.
Catherine.
Yep.
And you were talking about algae problems. And the horticulture industry, specifically the greenhouse industry, has picked up some technology from the swimming pool people, and they're starting to use copper ionizers. It's a system that just kind of electrolyzes copper into the water. And David Lewis has piped in, and it says there's a device called an ozonator that is used in hot tubs. And it's also good at disinfecting surfaces. So there's a couple other options to use besides chlorine.
Well, we talked about ozone earlier on.
Yep.
And
So we're
most
just sort of bringing it back up, but
are mainly used in the big
it's
commercial.
kind of an interesting topic unto itself.
That's cool. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, the really big nurseries like Bailey are now starting to use this system so that they're not dumping so many chemicals into their water solution and then have to deal with those chemicals and the byproducts later. And it just reduces their costs. And I think over long term, it's kind of a good way to go for hydroponic systems, because now you're dealing with one less thing to worry about, or a couple things less to worry about.
Good to know. I'll have to look into that. Ozonator.
Yeah, if you just put in, if you just go onto the Google search and just put in copper ionizer systems, it comes up with a whole bunch of stuff, but it comes up mainly for pools and keeping swimming pools clean, because swimming pools are an interesting mix.
They are.
Not my favorite thing to dip into as an adult. Yeah. So any other thoughts or questions, comments? You're welcome to pipe in and
Please do pipe in.
join the topic, or if you have thoughts, questions, experiences, we'd love to hear about it.
I'd love to hear some of Becky's experiences with her tomatoes.
Hi, this is Becky
There you go.
with tomatoes. Maybe I missed a part of your presentation, Mike. Did you talk about white flies as one of the pests?
No, I'm not specifically, no.
Have you experienced white flies yet?
No, I haven't.
Oh, lucky you. Someday you will get white flies, and then you will have you will know my pain. You know, for anybody starting a hydroponics system, I would suggest don't bring anything into that environment, whether it's a greenhouse or your garage or wherever you're doing this. Don't bring anything in there other than seeds and your medium. Anytime you bring in soil or a friend's plant, you don't know what's on that. And I'm pretty sure that's how I got white flies in the first place, is I overwintered a friend's plant.
Ouch.
And if you're lucky enough to have a brand new greenhouse and you're running hydroponics, don't bring in anybody else's plant. Keep it as sterile as you can.
Thank you. I hope I never get those things.
Oh, you will. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I'm sure. So what did you do to get rid of them?
I tried various things, including the parasitic wasp. I can't remember. Oh, the name was Encarsia formosa.
Okay.
And they're just expensive, and I don't think they killed enough to be worth their price. I finally just shut down everything every December, and I let the greenhouse freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And that took care of it. And then by the next spring, maybe March, when the tomatoes were ready to be transplanted into the greenhouse, then I closed it up again and it was ready to go. But I did have to let it freeze a couple of hard times to get rid of them.
Okay.
Very severe treatment, I know.
Yeah, it worked, apparently.
Yeah, it works, but it's hard to keep around the calendar a 12-month operation going if you have to freeze it every winter to get rid of pests.
Do you think they wintered over at all?
Say that again?
Do you think they wintered over?
No. White flies do not, they do not survive freezes. The only way they freeze in our country is through the greenhouse system.
Okay.
And you know, they're at the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens. They're probably at various nurseries that were around town at the time. And they're on people's houseplants. So again, cleanliness is essential. Don't bring anything into your hydroponics environment in the way of a plant or anything that might have any insect or pathogen on it.
Okay, thank you so much. Any other questions from anyone?
Yeah, so everyone, Becky brings up a really good point in that you never want to get white flies because they're so incredibly difficult to get rid of. They cause a lot of problems with your plants, and it's just a nightmare. So again, if you buy plants, really look them over well. You might even want to give them a good bath just to make sure nothing's on there, but the best way to go is to grow your own so that you know you're not bringing unwanted pests in. And thrips are another pest you don't want to have to deal with. Spider mites, I think they just live here in the air. I've had problems with them in my greenhouse. So part of your job as a grower is to be constantly scouting for problems. And I know that's kind of one of those weird things where you're looking for problems, but the more you look, the better you look, and the better you control the environment, the least likely you are to have the problems. But scouting is going to be your #1 job as far as pest control. So with that, any other thoughts or questions? And again, this has been recorded. And if you look at the chat box, I do have the location of where it's at, the website. It'll also be posted to the Laramie County Master Gardener website. So there'll be a lot of other opportunities to access it. So not hearing or seeing any other questions. I've got 7:30. And at this point, I think we'll end the program. And we do have another program coming up on August 11th. And that will be with Scott Shell from the University of Wyoming on grasshoppers in the garden and how to do that. How to control those. Of course, my standard answer is get chickens. But he'll have a lot more insight into it than my kind of flip answer. So with that, everybody, stay tuned, stay safe, and y'all have a really good evening, and we'll see you later. So good night.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks you, Becky. Take care.
Good night.